Hey, welcome to the Star Wars Unlearned podcast. My name is Josiah Shuett, and I'm joined by Nathan Hawley. What we're doing is we're looking at Star Wars from the perspective of its creator. So we're turning off our fan brains and really just trying to uncover the story that Lucas is trying to tell. This is episode 12 in our series on the Phantom Menace, where we explore the filmmaking, the history, the mythology, and everything else that Lucas and his team used to bring this first chapter of the Star Wars saga to life. So join us as we dive in and unlearn what we have learned about the Star Wars story. So we finished up with the pod race. That was the last thing we talked about. And it was Watto and Qui-Gon talking about Anakin's fate. And so I think the next scene is Qui-Gon showing up, everyone showing up at the ship to drop off this the parts and get it and get everything installed. It's our first time seeing Obi-Wan in a while, too. We haven't seen him in a bit.
Yeah, and this is the line that you've referenced a few times with Obi-Wan's character still. Another pathetic life form.
Yep. And just Obi-Wan has this immediate, negative reaction to both Anakin and Jar Jar, and they both turn out to be very, very helpful. So, he underestimates people throughout the series, He's often in kind of one step. He starts out kind of one step behind everybody, and eventually he, embodies Qui-Gon a little bit more, and he gets to that point where he sees potential in people.
A pretty strong rebuke here from Qui-Gon. Yeah, I mean, you see Obi-Wan kind of doing that knowing smile, like, yeah, here's another one, right? And Qui-Gon just shuts him down. He's like,
Yeah.
It's the boy who's saved us, basically.
Yeah.
And you see Obi-Wan just like, oh, okay.
It's like, I'm sorry, yeah. And he can see him, Qui-Gon thinks this kid is the chosen one, right? So this is a big deal to him. It's not just, like, it's a boy who's responsible for getting us his parts, but, like, this kid, he deserves some respect because he's got some potential I've seen in him that could, mean a whole lot to the galaxy. So, yeah. And Obi-Wan's just like, whatever. Obi-Wan's kind of has that mindset that we had at the beginning of stopping on Tatooine, which is sort of like, okay, we're just kind of stuck here. Eventually we're going to get back to the plot eventually, but we're just kind of taking a break here. It's like, we just need to get going. And Qui-Gon has now realized, oh no, this is actually very important that we're here. As he says, nothing as he says, I think later in the next scene, he says nothing happens by accident. Like, we were here for a reason. This is important to be here. And so.
And then we go back to the hut, and Anakin gets a ton of money.
Exactly. Yep.
At least I'm assuming that's money. Yeah, he says it's money. Yep.
Yep.
I always thought it was kind of funny how, like, Anakin says, "Look at all the money we have," and, like, his mom just takes it.
Exactly. It's like
sweet, thank you.
We don't have any money. I have all the money. You're a kid. Yeah.
I always just kind of chuckled at that.
Yeah, it reminds me of I think it's Jerry Seinfeld had a bit where his kid, when his kids got old enough, they asked him like, are we rich? He says, I am. You're a kid. You got nothing. You got to work for it. But it's like, yeah, like, that's funny. Just the parent just takes all the money. It is funny. And I guess it's not technically part of the movie, but I guess it's worth mentioning that the Greedo deleted scene happens between Qui-Gon coming back from the ship and them arriving at he and Anakin. Actually, that's where he picks up Anakin from that scuffle with Greedo, and then they walk to the house, and that's when he hands him the credits.
Okay.
But,
you want to fill us in on that scene, maybe, for those who haven't seen it?
Yeah, so for people who don't know, there's a deleted scene. It's in the screenplay that we've been referencing a lot throughout this podcast, and they shot it, and it's a really cool scene where Qui-Gon's coming back from the ship to deal with his unfinished business, like he told Obi-Wan, and Anakin is there in the street, basically scuffling with a Rodian, and it's turns out to be Greedo. So that's a little Easter egg for the audience. We don't know who that is, if you're watching this in order, but if you've seen 4, 5, and 6, you know who Greedo is. But basically, Greedo has said that Anakin cheated, and Anakin doesn't like to hear that. didn't want that, and so yeah, they start fighting, and Qui-Gon. It's a little teaching moment for the Qui-Gon where he asks Anakin, what's going on? Anakin says, I cheated. And Qui-Gon says, did you? And Anakin says, no. And so Qui-Gon asks Greedo, do you still think he cheated? Greedo says, yes. And so Qui-Gon says, well, Anakin, you're just going to have to accept his opinion. Fighting won't change anything. And that's something that Anakin does not. That's a lesson that Anakin does not learn well. Does not remember, especially in the next movie. We see him, not really accepting Obi-Wan's opinion of him or anyone's. He accepts the opinion of the opinion he likes, which is Palpatine. Palpatine always buttering him up and telling him how great he is. But so it's a nice little scene that sets up a problem that Anakin has. Necessary. I understand why they cut it. The Greedo thing is just kind of a little cameo. It doesn't really add too much. And we already kind of know this about Anakin. We've seen before people question, Anakin doesn't like it when people underestimate him or accuse him of being less than he's capable of. Whenever someone calls him out as a slave, he reacts very badly. He's like, I'm a person, not a slave. I'm Anakin, So that I think is one reason why the scene was probably cut, probably for time, but also it was cut just because it was not really necessary. But it's a nice thing just to watch because we're so used to seeing the movie as it is. When you see these deleted scenes, it kind of resets your brain. You go, oh yeah, this is you. It kind of shakes you out of your comfort zone and goes, okay, this is this is where Anakin's character is, and this is what's happening, and this is. I don't know. It's a nice little reminder of where you were when you didn't know what was happening with Star Wars when it was new for the first time. So I do like looking at those deleted scenes, even though they don't really count for various reasons. Maybe George still thinks in his mind that it happened, but there's other deleted scenes where they change the story, and so he clearly deleted them because he changed his mind. So this one I think probably still counts, but Anyway, it's just a fun little scene.
Yeah, it is. It's a nice. It really is a nice foreshadow. I mean, you really get the sense of what's coming and what he's capable of, which I remember watching that scene years ago, and I remember it feeling kind of jarring because the Anakin that is painted in Episode 1 is very friendly, very kid-like, and we, like you said, there's definitely hints of that in there of what's to come, but it's so subtle. Whereas like the Greedo one's just really obvious.
Yeah, it's true. Good point.
He's down just wailing on this guy. It's like up to this point you've just seen Anakin get a little grumpy, things we kind of understand, but that was like, whoa, here's this guy who just snaps. So I kind of like it. I like how it really does foreshadow these things, but I can see why they took it out for sure, where it just seems really jarring, especially if you're a kid, if you're watching Anakin right after this pod race and just beating the snot out of this alien.
Yeah, true. It is
like, whoa.
Yeah, it's a weird change. It's a weird cut to go from that, the victory of the pod race, to all of a sudden, now he's just upset and beating up on kids. It's like, okay, it's true. Yeah, it's a good point. I didn't really put that together, but yeah, like it kind of saves his first sort of, I don't know, big emotional kind of downturn to Episode 2. Not like this is a huge deal, but he's a kid, but it's still more of the darkness in him that we've ever seen in the movie up to this point. We don't really see it again until Episode 2. So that's a good point that it's kind of an outlier in this movie in terms of his personality and his emotion. But that's interesting. Yeah, I never thought about it that way. Yeah,
I don't know what George would have to say about that, but I appreciate it being taken out, even though it is telling. It's just this episode is just really, even what you said with Anakin in the past, like even his little dark moments, they're so subtle and we all understand it. They look cute in this one. That wouldn't look very cute. That deleted scene.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it doesn't, even if it was included, I guess that wouldn't particularly bother me because still would just chalk it up to like, well, that's kids, boys will be boys kind of thing. But I guess with the context of knowing where it goes, it does. It has darker connotations when you've seen Revenge of the Sith. It's like, this is actually this spark turns into a flame and it gets out of control at some point. But at this point, it still can seem kind of innocent. But I agreed. I do think it's smart they took it out. It makes sense. It's kind of redundant. It doesn't add a whole lot, and maybe it goes a little too far, and maybe brushes on the dark side of Anakin a little too early on. Although I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because the Jedi Council kind of bring it up later, and it is a bit of a shock when they bring it up. It's like, what? There's this darkness in this kid? If you're watching in order, you're kind of surprised, but maybe this would help kind of bolster their argument. I don't know. It's interesting.
That's a good point.
These deleted scenes always are kind of provide little. There's reasons to include it, reasons to take it out. Sometimes I go back and forth. Maybe I'm changing my opinion on it right as we speak. I don't know. But anyway, we'll see. Anyway. But it's a fun little scene, and it's worth mentioning, even though it's not technically part of the movie. But
definitely, yeah. So then we enter. Yeah, we're back home. Do you have any thoughts on this scene? This seems like a big pivotal scene here. And you see it right off the bat in Shmi's look, where the second she hears that he's free, you just see her go, oh, okay. She knows it. Yep. All right, so I don't want to steal your thunder. Go ahead.
No, I don't. No, you go for it. Away. You say anything? No, you go first.
No, that's all I have for right off the bat. I'm sure I'll have some more as we go through, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, not only is Anakin freed, but his mom gets to keep all the prize money, so she's she's going to be in a better state than she was before. Like, she can use that money probably to get maybe make her house better, have an easier life for herself or something. I'm not sure how much money being a pod race gets you, but I'm sure it's a lot. I mean, minus the price of the parts that you. But so that's like her one kind of consolation prize, I guess, is that. But then she has to let go of her son. It's interesting. Yeah, not being a parent, I can only kind of imagine what that thought process is like. So maybe you can shed some light on that when I'm, because I'm sure you can, because I can't, because I don't have kids. But I just that thought of wanting what's best for your kid, wanting to sacrifice your life for theirs, like not just like meaning you die, but like sacrificing what your life could be, the great things you could have. You're potentially sacrificing. Her freedom in order so that he could have his, which is what Qui-Gon did. He said, "Well, I'm going to pick him instead of Shmi. He's got a future, and she doesn't really. She's kind of had her time in a sad way, kind of." It's a traumatic thing, and I'm kind of glad that the movie didn't play it up too big and too serious, because there's a lot of scenes just in the next handful of scenes where it could get super emotional, could get super like overly like sad and teary, and as a kid that'd be really kind of hard to deal with watching it. And so they kind of walk it back and don't go like Shmi doesn't exhibit a whole lot of emotion. I know the character and the actress has gotten some criticism for that,
right?
But I do think it would have been weird if all of a sudden the movie just got super sad and emotional. But it is a big deal, right? Because your whole world and environment is mom when you're a little kid. When you're a baby, you can't walk. She carries you everywhere. You get your food from her. You get everything from her. She is your world, like literally, not just metaphorically. And then if gradually you grow away from her, and dad is the one who kind of brings you into the world. And that's what Qui-Gon's doing. He's taking the child. He's the father taking the child away from mother and preparing him for the new world. He's quite literally leaving his world, and now he's thrust into a new one in more ways than one. Not just Tatooine, not just slavery, but just his mom. That was his only family, his only foundation, really.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah, and so now he's being thrust into a new one with a new father figure. Where Watto was kind of like we talked about, the kind of sorry excuse for a father figure before. The twisted, dark version of a father figure. That unfortunately Anakin is destined to become for his son.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
But anyway, I've been talking about it. A lot.
That's great.
So I'll let you. I have other things, but I want to cut myself off before I drone on too long. So. What do you think?
No, I'm just along for the ride. I think that was great. That always struck me how, even as a kid, I always kind of wanted this to have more impact, just because it is such a big deal. But I say that because I appreciate what you said there. It's just saying how really jarring that could be to be removed or to be just yanked that hard emotionally. I remember that moment when I left my parents. I was 17. I was moving out across the country, so I was heading to Nashville from Colorado. That was a big deal. I had a really hard time with it, and actually this scene was a big help to me in getting through that. Is it's really portrayed, especially when you hit that musical tones, John Williams, when Anakin's actually walking away from his mom. Yeah. It's this triumphant sound, I mean, it's the Force theme, right? And it's just like, wow, this is so cool. Like, it's not celebrating the fact that he's leaving his mom, but it's celebrating the fact that he's overcoming this huge hurdle, right? He's taking on the hero's journey. He's doing it. He's taking up the mantle, leaving everything behind, making the ultimate sacrifice, which we know later will come to be the sacrifice that saves the galaxy. Yep. But I've always really appreciated that, how everybody has to take that step at least some point in their life, where it's like, it's time to leave home. It's time to accept the journey, the destiny that I have, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you saying that too. It's just like, oh, well, there is a sadness, and there's always a sadness in leaving home, but it's a heroic, natural, good thing at the same time. And I really appreciate hearing that. And I appreciate seeing the mom side of this too, where she's trying to be strong. She's trying to hold it together. Yeah. But it is hard. Yeah. And it made me think about this too, when you were talking, we don't really get a lot of emotion per se in Star Wars. Yep. You know what I mean? Like, you don't see a lot of tears. You don't see a lot of, how do you want to say that? I mean, there's emotion, but it's I don't know, maybe just emotion manifest kind of thing. Because you don't watch Star Wars and see people crying, or even the flip side of it, even the rage. You don't even see the rage a lot either. I mean, Palpatine a little bit, but and that's just kind of Star Wars. I mean, I think you're right. It would feel really weird for this to be like a big dramatic teary scene, like from the actors. I mean, not necessarily how it makes you feel, but yeah. So good point.
Yeah, it's true. Like, people talk about the kind of emotional constipation of this scene, to borrow a phrase from Tarzan, and of these scenes, and I go, Luke doesn't cry when he goes back to his homestead and his aunt and uncle are burned to a crisp, and Leia doesn't, burst into tears when her planet explodes. Like, there's no, time spent with their emotions. Like, really, the only kind of emotional Star Wars movie is Revenge of the Sith, and I think it's because it is the character. It's the main focus of the whole saga of the story is Anakin, and he's the one going through this traumatic experience, and and so that is like the kind of huge turning point where everything is flipped on its head, and it's a big 180 in the story. And I think that's where it is the most appropriate to have that kind of emotion. That's where Padme starts breaking down, crying, "You're breaking my heart," and Obi-Wan's crying at him, and Anakin's, everyone's crying in Revenge of the Sith, because it's earned at that point. And I think Revenge of the Sith is kind of a very, very strange entry in Star Wars, because it's the odd man out in a lot of ways. Yeah. George broke with a lot of traditions with that one, because the movie serial Flash Gordon kind of model doesn't quite fit with the story he was telling at that point. It does, but like aesthetically, but when it came to the emotional content, when it came to the arc of the characters, you really needed to be more. He was really leaned more into the mythology, the opera of the space opera, that side of it, where it's just very intense in a way that he hadn't really gotten into before. And I think part of the reason we don't see emotion in Star Wars is, especially going back to New Hope. New Hope is the template that every movie followed. So why is Luke not, break down in tears when his aunt and uncle die? Why is Leia, not an emotional wreck after Alderaan explodes? Well, it's just because if you look at those old Flash Gordon movie serials, there was no emotion anywhere. There was no one cried. No one was, the hero would, grunt, if he got punched in the face, he'd go, "Oh, that hurt," but he wouldn't, he wasn't having an existential crisis. There's a monster coming around the corner. And so, the characters like scream or something, but that's the most emotion. There's no one's thinking or contemplating, the relationship, or there's no leaving your mother kind of scenario. That's all something that George added to Star Wars. That wasn't really baked in there. So into the space opera movie serial formula. So there's all that wooden acting that all kind of comes from that. And so he does use that a lot for his films, but when he needs to get a little bit more emotional, needs to get a little more serious, like he does in this film, but especially in Revenge of the Sith, where he kind of goes all out. That's where he kind of breaks with that movie serial tradition and really kind of makes Star Wars kind of becomes its own thing at that point. It makes it becomes separate from Flash Gordon in a lot of ways, but that's one big way that it does is it does way more with its characters in terms of their emotional arc and their complexity than its inspiration does with its characters. So,
that's a great observation. Huh. What do you know is the only time we see a tear on Anakin in Episode 3? Is that the only time we see tears in Star Wars? Like,
he cries in Episode 2 after when he's young.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That is
kind of
true.
Confessing to Padme that he's like, I killed him. He's ashamed at having lost it. And he cries when his mom dies, and so we definitely see that. And it's true. I kind of neglected Episode 2. It's a good point. There's a lot of emotion in that one as well, but that's kind of set up. These next few scenes kind of set up that idea. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of. I'm trying to think if anyone cries in the original trilogy.
Yeah. I don't think they do. Right? I mean,
Luke cries when Anakin dies on the Death Star on the ramp of the shuttle when his head finally falls back and Luke's sitting there he's like, Father, and then there's that one shot of like Luke with like one tear.
He does have a tear. Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember actually seeing a tear on anybody, but now you say that, maybe there is one. Yeah.
I think, I mean, Leia doesn't really cry when Han dies, or Han, goes in carbonite, but she's upset. She doesn't really cry. No tears, really. I don't think. That might be the only one I can think of is Luke crying at the end of Return of the Jedi. I don't know. We'll see.
Does he?
As we go through, we'll
find
out.
Yeah, now I have to remember. But still, I mean, it still goes to show, like, even the emotional parts aren't super dramatic, Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's no accident that all these movies are mostly rated PG, except for Revenge of the Sith, which is PG-13, because that's the movie where you need to be a little bit more mature to kind of deal with what's going on. And a lot of people just attribute that to like the imagery of Anakin being burned alive, but like there's not much more than just the visual reaction to just the visual nature of that. It's kind of gross to look at, but just emotionally what's going on with his character at that point. Like, your hero is now turned into the devil. He's now turned like the worst version of himself possible. Yeah. And as a young kid, if you're 8, 9 years old watching that, you might not be able to deal with that very well. And I can't remember how old I was when I finally saw all of Revenge of the Sith. I definitely wasn't 13. I must have been I was definitely younger than that, but the movie came out when I was 8. I think I was 8 or 9, so I was too young for it. But a few years later, I think I finally watched it. But yeah, it's still, it's, I can't imagine being a kid watching it in order, and all of a sudden, Anakin, your hero, turns becomes the villain. It's just that's got to be so traumatic, especially if you're a young kid. So it makes sense why that's the one that. If you're going to have an emotional moment, let it be that one, because that's the one where it probably counts the most. It's this huge turning point. And then probably number 2 is when Anakin comes back at the end of Return of the Jedi. That's probably the second most emotional, at least for me. I get all choked up at the end of that movie. So.
Oh man, that gets me every time. So on RFR, Rebel Force Radio podcast, great podcast, they will ask their guests. It's called the Yoda questionnaire. Have you heard that? It's so good. Where it's all these like just cool questions, like icebreaker questions about Star Wars, and one of them is like, what moment in Star Wars makes you cry? And that's the one that I get. Hands down, every time when Anakin becomes Anakin again, Vader's Anakin now, tosses the Emperor down. Oh man, I love it. That's the part every time.
Yeah, it's funny. It didn't used to hit me, but I think since I grew up and moved out, it's actually I do tear up a lot of the times when Anakin leaves his mom in this movie. Like that does get me, even though they're not crying. A lot of times I'm like, kind of to myself. When I
definitely will feel it.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, probably that one. Yeah, and Return of the Jedi for sure. I think there's another one I'm missing. I can't really think of it right now. But anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're kind of long
Yeah.
Good little detour. That was fun. But
yeah.
Well, I'll try and bring it back to the scene. But,
yeah.
I like in this scene how Anakin, when he, Qui-Gon says you're free, and he's like you're no longer a slave. He kind of just said it with a smile on his face. But then, Anakin later says, "You mean I get to go with you in your starship?" Like that's what he's thinking of. That's all it means to him at this point. Like he doesn't really, the weight of it, the gravity of it hasn't really sunk in. He thinks it's going to be a vacation. Like I get to go on a starship. I've always wanted to go on a starship. We've talked about that. Like he's always dreamed of that. But Qui-Gon kind of brings him back down to earth. He says, "It's not going to be, a cakewalk."
Yeah.
He's like, "It's going to be hard. It's a hard life," and that's kind of a hallmark of the hero's journey stage of the call to adventure, because it's the first stage in the journey of the heroes. Anakin and Luke, they both get the call to adventure, but they neither one of them really want to leave. But eventually, Anakin decides to go. Anakin doesn't refuse the call, and but Luke does refuse it. But then it's kind of forced by circumstance to accept it later on. He's like, "Well, I got nothing left for me, so I might as well go." And so Anakin, he doesn't refuse the call, but he kind of skips that stage of refusing it. But a lot of times there's like one of his allies, or like a threshold guardian, which is like the character like Yoda, which is sort of like the person who kind of guides you along from one place where you're familiar to a new unknown place. But in this case, it's his ally Qui-Gon that kind of talks to him and says, you should be a little worried. There's some risks involved. There's always a character who kind of, tells him what's what. So that's kind of what Qui-Gon is doing here. So that's a very, very old tradition in this kind of story. And, but again, it's Qui-Gon who he promises to look after him. He says that to Shmi, like, I'll look after him, I promise. And again, we're setting up that expectation that it will be him who trains Anakin. At this point, we're thinking, oh, yeah, Qui-Gon, Anakin, that's what the story is going to be about from here on out. But of course, you and I know that doesn't happen. It gets flipped on its head in a really cool way later on in this movie. But but it's a nice little pass. Exactly, it's a nice little passing of the torch. Yeah. From like Shmi, and she says thank you, and again, that setting up that father figure of Qui-Gon is a cool how that happens in this scene.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. I mean, I feel like this is just a real window into a child getting ready to leave his mom, I mean, I feel like George just did a really good job of nailing it. It's very down to earth, So I feel like most kids, especially when they're young like that, they're just naturally going to be excited, like, wow, I get to finally do something cool. And, the expectation's really small until the reality sets in a little bit, like, wait. This means I have to leave mom, and he kind of comes and says that, wait, what about mom? Because, he's like not even hesitant at all. And Qui-Gon's like, it's really hard. He's like, yep, okay, let's do it. And then it sinks in a little bit. I just feel like that's just such good, I don't know, just human life, That's what goes on when you're a kid and you're excited about something and you're not thinking about all the consequences yet, And I really appreciate that.
That's true.
And then you see Anakin start to deal with that a little bit, like, wait, I don't want things to change. And like you said, this is such a powerful message from his mom, because we're going to see Anakin deal with that the whole rest of the series. Like, I don't want things to change. They're gonna. I want them to be the way I want them to be. And boy, his mom just sets up the lesson. You can't stop that. Yep. You gotta let go.
Yep.
100%. He will not let go.
Yeah. And it's so sad that the words come. It's so ironically, it's a tragic irony that the words come from her, because she's the very thing she becomes the thing he can't let go of, and the things he wants to change is her death, right? And so, it's like pretty much her last words to him, almost before she meets him again. They talk briefly before she dies, but last thing she told him before she sent him on his way. It's like that. This is the first thing he forgets when she dies, and so that's just I mean, how many? That's sort of like a haunting idea. It's like how many lessons from our parents or from other people do we get that we forget to apply that to the very people we've learned it from. I've definitely just as a child with in relationship to a parent, it's like they teach you so many things and you're like, that makes sense. Yep, totally with you. I'm totally with you, mom and dad. That makes sense. And then it's put into practice, and a lot of times it's back at them, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, I've done the very thing that I was totally convinced was wrong, but now I've done it just because I wanted to. I was being selfish like Anakin was, and it's not just hurting me, it's hurting the people I love, the people who warned me against this. Anakin, all his teachers he eventually turns on, and he hurts them with the very things that they warned him against, whether it's his mom. He doesn't hurt his mom, but he forgets. Bad things happen because he fails to listen. He fails to learn the lessons from his teachers, whether it's his mom or Obi-Wan or whoever. But yeah.
Man, what a big theme for Star Wars, right? And it just encapsulates the Jedi versus the Sith. It's all about control, holding on or letting go. Yeah, because the Sith are complete opposite of that, and that's the lure, isn't it? Like from the Sith, like I'll give you power, I'll give you control. You will be able to make things the way you want them. You don't need to let go. You can hold on even stronger, and I'll give you the power to do it. Yeah. Whereas the Jedi, like enjoy them, and it's fun to watch, especially in the Clone Wars. Anakin deal with that, where it's like he doesn't see the benefit of letting go. It's and the Clone Wars really deals on how he just hears them as cowards for letting go. Like he hears the Jedi saying, "Just give up, let go, just be detached," and he's not willing to do that. He's like, no. Whereas a lot of Jedi are saying, "Well, let go, but still enjoy, still enjoy life. This doesn't mean you have to be miserable." But yeah, it's an interesting balance there. He's just like, "Nope, I refuse." We see that a lot with Ahsoka, how he's learning to deal with Ahsoka and letting go of her. And I mean, that's the whole reason she's even in this story, right? It's like Yoda says, you need to learn how to let go. You need to learn how to let go of this Padawan. So that's the whole point. Yeah, so it's just cool. Cool to see him. And here I feel like it's such a celebration again with Anakin, because he does let go at least a little bit, like he does take the step when he's under the right parents, under Qui-Gon and his mom. Yeah. But after that, when we lose them both, essentially, Anakin can't do it. Yeah, it's just so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, and that's a good point, because who's the new piece on the chessboard that's added when Anakin starts to forget all these lessons? It's Palpatine. Right? Because before he loses his mom, we've had that scene with Palpatine where he's talking about, "Oh, I see you become the greatest, the most powerful," all that stuff. He's just buttering him up, building up his ego. And that is, and it's not necessarily Obi-Wan's failure. It's just there's this unknown player in the game that Obi-Wan and the Jedi don't know about, which is Palpatine, which is twisting their own words, where they're not as good as Qui-Gon maybe, but they're doing their best. They're doing what they can as Jedi, and Anakin's, he's doing okay. He's on the right path, especially in this movie, he, like you said, he does let go, but he's just gets this outside influence that, despite all his good intentions, despite all the progress he made, that eventually is his Achilles heel. But yeah, it's so intricate and juicy, and it's fun to discuss. It's such a great story, and it's crazy that we just got this as a kid's film. It's like, it's crazy, complex, very, very. It's like the human story, and we're all just like, lightsabers, cool, eventually, but it stays with you, and to the point where we're talking about it now when we're in our 20s and 30s, and it still has meaning for us. So that's super cool. But yeah, I just that, and it's just another thing that he just forgets. I just thought about this when in this scene where he actually does walk away from her. The last thing she says to him is, "Don't look back," right? Which is, of course, that's exactly what he does. Later on, he was looking, he's thinking about his mom, like, he's in episode 2. He's like, I want to go back to Tatooine. I got to. It's revisit. You can't go home. It's like that old idea. Like you can't go back and relive a childhood. You can't make things the way they used to be. And so, just by doing that, you kind of destroy that memory you had, or destroy that. It's never the same. And in this case, for him, it's really, really bad, because he goes back and it actually he literally witnesses the death of that part of his life, his mom. So it's like that idea of like, don't look back, just keep moving forward. And, the past, you can't change it, No, again, going into Lion King now. Hakuna Matata. You got past behind you. No, but,
yeah.
In a weird way, but not as heartless as that. Obviously, you have to deal with it. But yeah, it's just that idea of like, don't look back. Don't. She's telling him to let go. You can't stop the change. Don't look back. All these lessons he forgets. But at this point, he is. I gotta remember at this point in the story, he's doing it. He actually is listening. He doesn't look back. He's doing the right thing. He's on a great trajectory. He's on his way to be like the greatest Jedi ever. But there's just this one tiny part of him, one tiny thing that just never quite gets fixed. Everything else is on its way to. Everything else gets dealt with. He's goes to Jedi therapy or whatever it is. And he's doing well. He's making progress. But there's just that one part that won't go away. And we always have that one piece of us, that one evil, that one sin that just always we just can't deal with it on our own. And so that is just it's a nice. I mean, it's a harsh reality that gets put on display here, but it's necessary, and it's good to see that at least at the beginning there is progress, and that he is able to, when he's surrounded by people who actually want to help him and actually have his best interests in heart, who actually love him, then he actually can overcome it all. That's when he starts to be influenced by people who don't, and he starts becoming selfish. Then it all falls apart.
Yeah, man, and it's so cool to think about that. Just again, wow, I mean, so powerful here, right? It's just, it's hard to put into words because you just feel the emotion of this scene, and the victory of it, and just the potential, and man, the battle between selfishness and selflessness, and. We all can relate to that. I think that's why this is so just powerful. I really love how you said, like, it's Anakin looking back that gets him into trouble, And George has said that, and we'll come to this in episode 2, but when his mom dies, that's the birth of Darth Vader at that moment. Yep. And he said, like, he's always planting seeds, like one death equals the birth of another thing in Star Wars, and that's the birth of Darth Vader. And I just think, wow, that's so powerful. I never even thought about him disobeying his mom in that sense, where she tells him don't look back, but he does. And that's what brings his downfall. Yeah, I've never picked up on how much she is the voice of reason and light in this whole saga. I never caught that until you said that. It's like, wow, she sets up the whole thing, and so
well, it's cool. Funny because Anakin has this constant, devil on one shoulder, but the angel on his other shoulder just changes form. It starts out as his mom, then it turns into Qui-Gon, then it turns into Obi-Wan, then it becomes Padme, and then eventually, it feels like it goes away, but eventually it comes back as Luke, right? And so, and so that you hear these same this same voice, this same sentiment just keeps popping up in his life throughout different members of his family, and as Ahsoka too, right? We got the mom, the father, the sister, the brother, the wife, and then the child. Every member of his family really is screaming this message at him, and he doesn't quite get it until the very end. But eventually he does. And I do love in this scene where just visually that you have that shot of Anakin just in the middle of between Qui-Gon and his mom, just kind of looking back and forth, like visually stuck in between the father who's the doorway to a new world, and the mother who is just this secure foundation of, but it's it's the past, it's his, where he started, it's a place he has to leave from. Again, it's Tatooine is always the place where we get stuck, where the characters are always stuck on Tatooine. Tatooine is the place that you have to escape. It's a place you need to go from to leave. And so that's what his mom unfortunately represents to him in terms of his development, but she was also this source of great love and wisdom for him. So of course it's a difficult choice, but I just love the visual, just that shot of him being in between both of them. And of course he runs back to her, and then Qui-Gon, patiently waiting. Just Qui-Gon doesn't say anything in the scene, which is great. He's understanding. He's patient. He knows that's the great thing about Qui-Gon, is that he's understanding. He knows, as we've said before, like he's traveled the galaxy. He's seen things. He's not just hiding in a tower, or he's not hiding in he's not like a monk stuck in a monastery all the time. He explores the galaxy. He and Obi-Wan are out there dealing with disputes, and he knows what it's he knows what he's asking this kid, and he's know what to do. He knows especially what he's asking the mom to do, and how difficult that is. And so he's not, checking his watch like, "Come on, dude, we gotta go." He's very understanding and patient with it, which is just it just kind of reinforces that it is the best thing for Anakin. Yeah, and then just the first great Skywalker who does learn that, who embodies that lesson of letting go, is his mom, is Shmi. And of course we see Anakin embody that later, but obviously Luke does later on. But it's just cool seeing that her being her first example of how great a Skywalker can be is his mom. And there's a great little benchmark that we can measure Anakin against as he goes forward.
Yeah, that's really cool. I never thought about that before. Yeah, so powerful scene. I love that scene. It does get me every time. I mean, who can't relate to at least something in that,
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, and the music, you're right. Like the Force theme is just so great because it's not like you said, it is triumphant, but also it's a slightly melancholy. It's like it's not the most. It's not the happiest song ever, but it's also it's not sad. It's just like, whew, this is like heavy. Like this is a big thing that's happening. It's it's powerful, and it's and it's not too dissimilar from Luke's scene, the most famous, most iconic scene in Star Wars, where Luke's looking off at the sunset. It's like the music playing there. It's like there's something great is on the horizon. Something big is happening in my life right now, and Luke doesn't really realize it yet. He hopes for it, but Anakin does probably. Maybe he doesn't quite realize how big of a deal it is, but in that moment, it's happening to him. This huge separation, this leaving of Tatooine. Like Luke's looking forward to one day leaving Tatooine in that scene. And in this scene, Anakin actually is, accepting the truth of that it's actually going to happen to him. So it's and so just the Force theme is just it's of course in terms of the story, the Force is moving its pieces on the chessboard. Like it's the things are happening. The will of the Force is being done, and it's a big step in all that right now. So which is a big deal. So the music is just great there. So that's the last thing I'll say on that. But
oh, it's so good. I mean, who doesn't love that theme, But yeah, and it's just so powerful. Yeah, and I like that. I like it. Yeah, because it's not like the end of the song or like the end of the movie. The song, where they're celebrating at Naboo and stuff. Where it's not like bouncy. Yeah, that's a good point. There's still a melancholy side to it, but it's heroic. So here's the first steps of the chosen one taking on his journey,
Exactly.
So good. And this is the will of the Force. And things are now in motion and so good.
Yeah, it's heroic in the sense of the hero's journey. The first step is being taken, which could be, which I mean, like there could be bad stuff. There will be bad stuff ahead, but there'll also be great victory ahead as well. So it's a mixed emotion thing, but it's just powerful is probably the best way to describe it for sure. Yeah, and then pretty sure that the next scene is just the Sith probes reporting into Darth Maul, right?
Yeah. I was gonna say before we move on, this is kind of a side note, but I appreciate the little scene with 3PO.
Oh yes, I totally forgot about that. Yes,
Anakin says bye to 3PO. Yeah. And this is very 3PO. I'd prefer if I'd had a little more covering.
Yeah. Now that R2-D2 called me out and called me naked, I'd like to. Yep.
I'll make sure mom doesn't sell you. He's like, sell me. Such a 3PO.
And just a kid, like again, Anakin not quite grasping what's happening. Because again, he says like, well, I've been freed and I'm going away in a starship. Like that's the thing he's most excited about. He's like, I'm going on a starship. It's like, there's also this big thing that's happening. But yeah, and 3PO is like, oh, I wish you well. But yeah, it is a great little scene. I totally forgot about that. And it's one of those few, we talked about it, I think many conversations ago, but it's one of those rare shots in Star Wars where we get a POV of the character.
First person, yeah.
It's very, very rare we get that. And so it just adds an interesting, you're looking through the eyes of 3PO, which is interesting because that's what the audience does throughout a lot of these movies. 3PO is kind of the audience surrogate for some of the movies and a lot of different points within the movies. So it's we get actual like literal, we're actually looking through his eyes at this point. But it's a fun little scene, and again, it just kind of hammers home the childlike nature of Anakin and just how nervous and just funny 3PO is, and it's also kind of lightens the mood a bit after the kind of the heavy scene we had before, and the heavy scene that's about to come. It kind of throws us off balance for that.
Yeah, and I find it interesting. This is a little side note. I could be wrong on this, but I think this is the movie that has the least amount of time for 3PO. You know, like this is the movie that 3PO has the least amount of time in. Is that how to say that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's really prominent in all the other movies. You know, I thought it was kind of an interesting choice. I always thought, oh man, it's kind of weird that we don't really get 3PO in this movie. I mean, he's there for sure, but it's just he's not as big as in the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it's true. I remember realizing that because as a kid, I don't know. It's just I'm not really keeping track of screen time or any of that stuff. Right. I'm just to me, it's just the characters are. They seem like I remember thinking there's tons of. I loved Obi-Wan as a kid. I loved C-3PO, so I just thought there was just tons of them. I just felt every second they were on screen just was a big deal for me. So when I revisited it and realized, oh yeah, Tatooine is just the only time we see 3PO. He's barely in this movie, and Obi-Wan is pretty much not at all in the Tatooine sequence. He just shows up like 2 or 3 times just to say a few lines and goes away. And it's just like, oh yeah, it's weird to remember that certain characters kind of get sidelined and really kind of when you start to follow their arc and really measure how the characters contribute to the story, it's interesting to see how Lucas puts them in to play their part here and then he takes them out and he rearranges the characters. Now we're going to put Jar Jar and Padme together. Now we're going to put R2D2 and Obi-Wan or whatever it is. It's cool just to take note of that because that's something you're not really aware of that as a kid. So it's a good point. Yeah, it's 3PO is barely in this movie, but he leaves a big impression. At least he did for me as a kid.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this movie kind of feels like a handing off of the torch. You know what I mean? Like it feels like we're handing off the torch of the what do you want to call it? The Old Republic era, and we're handing it off to this new era coming. You know what I mean? Like Qui-Gon. This movie is so centered around Qui-Gon and Padme and Anakin. But I mean, like you said, Anakin doesn't even show up till like halfway through the movie, and then it's like we're handing it off. Like Qui-Gon, he's handing off the baton to Obi-Wan, and 3PO, he's another example. Like he's not a big example or a big piece in this movie, but he will be later in the other movies. It feels like a good start. You know what I mean? Like it feels like a good start to the story because we're being introduced to these characters and other ones are leaving. Like Darth Maul, he's like, whoa, here's this really cool bad guy, but he hands off the baton, right? It goes to Sidious. It's just cool. It just feels like a really good beginning. This is the beginning of the story. Here's Anakin, his beginning story. Yeah. So Padme, even her, she's really prominent in this movie, but in the other two, she won't be as prominent. So it's just kind of this handing off of this point of view, almost like here's where Star Wars has been, and now it's time to focus on this story.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Good start. But, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, and then like you said, George is so good at cutting us in between, back and forth. We get this little scene like, he's about there. He's on the heels now, right? The probe droid. Yeah, I love this scene. It's just so good. And anytime Darth Maul is on the scene, he just takes the show. So,
oh yeah,
total he's just so epic. And I remember as a kid watching this scene where he just like dives off on a speeder off the cliff, and you're like, "Whoa, that's so cool!"
Yeah, I loved that as a kid. Because it kind of takes you by surprise. All of a sudden, whoop, there he goes. And it's sort of something almost kind of funny about it, but also like, "Wow, that's so cool!" It just dives off and starts going. But yeah, again, this like every time we've seen the Sith or seen the bad guys, at least while we're on Tatooine, it's just a reminder of the stakes. That there's emotional scene with the mom and the kid, but also the plot is happening. Also, by the way, we have the fate of a planet is in the hands of this kid, and so we got to figure out what to do with him. And I just loved it. I always loved the design of these probe droids. I remember I had a little toy. I had a Darth Maul toy, and it came with these tiny little probe droids. I always thought they looked really, really cool.
They do look super cool.
I mean, the probe droids in Empire look cool also, but I always just like these little. Just these tiny little balls they have these tiny little plates. They almost it's like a face, but you can't really discern. Like that's not really a nose, that's not really a mouth, but something about it looks kind of face. Looks like a creature, sort of like it has an eye. I guess there's like 2 eyes and it has the antenna. I just always liked that design. I always wished it showed up again. I don't think it shows up ever again in any Star Wars media.
That's a good point. Yeah, I do really like it. It's, oh man, I know we've talked about it, but it's just so epic. Darth Maul doesn't say a single thing. It's just so cool. You don't need it to, he doesn't need to say anything. You get everything. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about a character arc. It was going him, like he changed probably more than definitely than almost than any other villain in Star Wars, maybe apart from Anakin, I guess. But going from this like silent brute that just is just there. His name is Maul. He's there just to rip things apart. But then he eventually grows into his own. He becomes like Sidious's apprentice, really, where he as Obi-Wan kind of embodies his master, Maul kind of embodies Sidious, and he turns into this kind of the schemer, the guy who's kind of trying to pull all the strings, and he turns into like the spider in the spider's web. It's just an interesting arc for him because like no one would have done that with Darth Maul. Like if you look at a lot of the fan films and every version of Darth Maul you see in the comics, he stays that kind of brute, and that's the kind of tendency as fans. Like we want our characters to stay as they are. We want Boba Fett to always be mysterious. We always want Darth Maul to always be quiet and menacing. But like as a storyteller, you want your characters to be going somewhere. You want there to be an arc. You want there to be a destination for them. And so it's interesting to see that Lucas would have. He's the only one who would have probably done that with Darth Maul, or would have felt comfortable doing that, because everyone else would have been too terrified, would have been too precious with it. Like, oh, we can't change Darth Maul. We can't do different things with him because he's too popular the way he is. And George just goes, nope, I have a plan for him. I have an idea of where to go with him. And it's different, and it took me a while to kind of get used to it, but but I settled into it, and I really like what he did with his character in Clone Wars.
Oh yeah, so good. I mean, look at him. He's one of the most popular characters, even still, like, and I think Clone Wars is a big part of that. I mean, everybody loves Darth Maul. I mean, I've never heard anyone be like, oh yeah, I don't really care for that guy.
Yeah, it's true. He's pretty universally liked.
Yeah, so he's just epic. But Clone Wars, I remember feeling that too. Where it's like, this feels weird. Like he's talking a lot. This is really bizarre. But it was really good. I mean, I loved him. His arc is fantastic. Yeah. Totally. Good point. Yeah, it's a really good point. How we as fans don't like change either, right? But I don't want things to change.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I've tried to, I tried to hold back a little bit on a lot of it because there's so many ways you can apply this to Star Wars fans where there's so many times where we turn into Anakin when we should be Luke. It's like, dude, like let things change. It's okay, things change. You can't, remember, don't look back. Don't hold the past so tightly in your hand that you can't, move forward into the future. It's like, no, that's the way of things. But again, like you said, like earlier, like rejoice, like hope that you like be happy that you have these great things that in your past. Be happy that we have these 6 movies and one TV show that we can revisit as many times as we want and still get new things from it. So yeah, it's great. And what else?
Oh man.
Yeah, it's a quick scene. I don't know. I love his speeder bike. The toy I had was the speeder bike, the Pro Droid. It was like basically this scene. And I love that toy. I love that thing so much. It was the coolest thing ever. And, and we saw more of the Pro Droid again in another deleted scene where Qui-Gon slashes it in half, which sets up why they're running later on in the next scene. But
yeah, I do wish they kind of kept that in there because it feels really odd that, I mean, you get the point, but it feels really odd to just cut to a scene where Qui-Gon and Anakin are running. But you understand why, because we all know that Qui-Gon is at least sensing this is coming. Something's coming. We got to hurry it up. But I always appreciate that deleted scene because it sets it up a little bit more. Yeah, and I always like that. But still a really cool scene.
Yeah, it was a cool scene. And it did. It did. That's a cool scene, and the deleted scene was also cool. I want to look up in the screenplay to figure out where this scene with Darth Maul when the Pro Droid was originally placed, because I'm totally spitballing and guessing here, but my guess would be that it would have been earlier maybe or later, because to go from as jarring as this cut kind of is from Darth Maul to all of a sudden Qui-Gon Anakin running, it'd been way weirder to go from Anakin and Qui-Gon just walking away from Shmi, and all of a sudden it cuts to them running.
Yeah.
And not have this thing, because there's this kind of phenomenon in editing. It's sort of like a rule now, or a technique that I can't remember who kind of ran this experiment, but Hitchcock talked about it, where basically you can show how there's the power of storytelling and just in editing. So you can show a shot of just a guy looking with just a neutral expression. He's just looking off in the distance. But then when you cut to something else, that tells the audience what he's thinking, or it tells them how that informs how they read his expression. So if it cuts to him looking at, a big feast, like, a table with tons and tons piles of food on it, and his neutral expression, people look at it and go, oh, he's hungry. Just by showing the next shot. Or they show, the next shot is, a woman in a bikini or something, all of a sudden, oh, he's creepy. The facial expression doesn't change. But it's just how editing can kind of psychologically tell you what to think. And so my thinking here is that it could be, since they removed that scene with the probe droid, that the closest equivalent they had was this scene with Darth Maul and the probe droid. And so that scene, even though it's still kind of a jarring cut, it's enough of a buffer where it gets you're oh no, like here's the villain, or kind of have that sinister feeling. And so when we cut to our heroes running and the intense music's playing, it's a little bit more of a psychologically consistent cut. It makes more sense from an emotional standpoint. We're kind of primed for it. We're ready for it, as opposed to another scene being before that, like Anakin and Obi-Wan, or Anakin and Qui-Gon walking away from Padme, Shmi, that had been very jarring. So I'm not sure where that Darth Maul scene fits into the original script, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was somewhere else and they put it here to make that transition a little more smooth.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, and it works, right? It totally works, because you get the sense that, like, they know he's coming. Something's coming. Yeah, and I always laugh at the memes in the scene where, Darth Maul, like, he's just gonna run over this kid, like, because he just headed straight for Anakin. He doesn't even know who this kid is. He's gonna plow him over. Yeah, it's just like, wow, what a character moment, But and Qui-Gon tells him to drop, and and then the super epic lightsaber fight. This is the first time we see a lightsaber duel, right? If you're watching in chronological order. Yep. I mean, we've seen lightsabers, but not a lightsaber versus lightsaber. It's the first time we see a Sith red blade. Yeah. And man, it's so cool. And that Darth Maul just does this flip off of a speeder and just starts fighting. We've never seen that before. So cool. Even if you're even if you've seen 4, 5, and 6 first, you don't see that. We've not seen something like that. It's like, whoa, so cool. And just the speed, I love it.
Oh yeah. And it's so interesting because it's our first lightsaber fight, but it's kind of abstract, like in episode 2, where we don't get a really good look at it. And I don't remember this as a kid either. Kind of revisiting later on as an adult, I realized, it's a lot of close-ups, it's a lot of quick cutting, it's a lot of shots that don't quite link up exactly. So you get this kind of pastiche, sort of abstract basically version of a fight that because they're saving it. Obviously, they're saving the big show of the fight for at the ending. But and it is such a great it's such a cool scene because at the end of that fight, Qui-Gon is tired and he's literally knocked off his feet. He barely made it out of there. That's the first time we've ever seen a Jedi so far act like that. It's the first time we've seen them like caught off guard like that. This new threat is something special and different, and we see that now. And we can understand the danger of the Sith now because we've seen how ineffective the other bad guys have been. So the battle droids have built up to this moment where we've seen them, the Jedi just cut through them like butter. They're not a threat. The Jedi are great. We can do anything. And then we slowly started to see them encounter these obstacles like, well, we don't have a Jedi mind trick's not working on this alien, so we can't get off this planet. We're going to try and find some other way to do it. They've hit that hurdle, and now we've got a full-on threat that's like, has found us, it's in our face, and it's almost got the best of us. Like Darth Maul almost wins at this point. Qui-Gon's like really on the back feet there, on his back feet, and he's really tired. And it's just, as an audience, like, oh no, this guy actually is a threat. Not only do the Sith kind of have a visual similarity with the Jedi, they also have lightsabers, and they're also very, very efficient and effective with those. And we're in trouble because this is an actual threat now. And so I just like that this scene is kind of the first like unveiling of the actual power of the threat of the Sith. to the Jedi. And it's just it's so cool how we just kind of George has been laying these breadcrumbs. It's kind of fed us, or has led us to this point where we had all this confidence in the Jedi. They're great. They're the heroes. They're untouchable. And all of a sudden, nope, they can be hurt. They can be wounded. They can be defeated. And that's no good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate that. You really get the sense that there's a threat here. Yeah. And Qui-Gon, I mean, he's not doing much, right? I mean, it's Darth Maul. He's flipping all over the place. He's quick. He's pushing Qui-Gon back, and he flees. Qui-Gon flees. You know, it's usually the other way around where the bad guys kind of flee. You know, like a Grievous sort of thing, where it's like, oh, we gotta get out of here because we're gonna lose. It's like, no, Darth Maul's in total control here. Yeah, and it forces Qui-Gon to leave, and it's Jedi Master. He's dad, right? This guy just came and kicked his butt.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, jumping all over the place, and Qui-Gon's sweaty. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Like, you seem exhausted, and like Panaka says, Qui-Gon's in trouble. You know, it's like, yeah, he is. He's just literally voicing what is going on in the audience's mind, and when Qui-Gon says, you like, I know they don't know what it is too. It's like you realize that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon aren't really aware of these guys. It's a surprise, and he's like, what does he say? He says, what was it? And he says, I'm not sure, but it was well trained in the Jedi arts. That's a clue, to the audience. Like, oh wait, these guys they know the Jedi's tricks. They know it's not just a different type of bad guy. Like they know their own. They're studying from the same book, I guess, as it were. And so that's makes them or that much more of a threat. Yeah,
it's interesting. He doesn't say the ways of the Force. It says Jedi arts. And that always struck me too. He's not like, oh, it's a strong in the Force, whatever. It's like, no, he knows our stuff.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
and it's almost like you kind of initially we forget that the Sith, because we don't see Star Wars until we see Star Wars. So when Star Wars starts, we see the Sith show up, but we learn later that the Sith have been quote unquote extinct for a millennium, and so their first thought isn't even it's a Sith. Like
right.
It doesn't even really first compute. Qui-Gon later says, like, I think it must be a Sith Lord, but at first, Obi-Wan don't even use that word because it's just they're still kind of in shock of what happened. But he just says Jedi arts. Like, someone trained this guy. Like, it's weird to think about. Qui-Gon's the first Jedi to see a Sith, and who knows how since Yoda was born. Like that's how that's how long it's been. And so that's just in terms of the history of the Jedi and Sith, that's a big moment. I never really thought about that before, but that first fight between a Jedi and a Sith in 1,000 years is in this tiny little battle in the desert of Tatooine.
Yeah, Tatooine of all places. That's a really good point. I never thought about that either. Yeah,
I just now thought of that.
Well, it's so epic. I mean, it's just so epic. I just can't say it enough. I love it. The lightsaber fighting is number one introduction. If you're watching episode 1, it's so good. But if you're used to the old trilogy, it's still so good. Like, you're just like, wow, this guy is cool. So good. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Just a little side note here.
I love the restraint not to have the second blade.
Yes, I totally agree how he doesn't do the double blade. Oh man. But I love that scene where it's just all you see is his back, and he just pulls that lightsaber out and turns it off. You're like, so cool. And just that anticipation. Oh, so good. I love the sync. You really get the impression that the Jedi are in sync here. Like Qui-Gon tells Anakin, tell him to take off, and that's the first thing Obi-Wan says. It's just he's in danger. Obi-Wan just says, take off. Like, because you get the impression that Anakin hasn't talked to Obi-Wan yet.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I just love how they're just so in sync. Like, this is what we do. We're trained, we're ready. And I always really appreciate that. Maybe unintentional, but I like it.
No, it's true. It's a good point because Anakin doesn't really meet Obi-Wan. Here, let's talk about that. The first meeting of Anakin and Obi-Wan is in the scene, and again, it's just treated as if it's this tiniest little thing. Not a big deal. It's downplayed because we don't realize the significance of it yet. We still think it's going to be Qui-Gon and Anakin, right? At this point. And so it's like, oh, you're Jedi too, cool, nice to meet you. Eventually it's like, yeah, you guys are going to be, having a life or death battle on the side of a volcano, and one of you is going to leave the other one for dead a couple times. Yeah, and it's just and then you're eventually going to end up killing the other. It's just crazy that all this is going to happen. It's just oh hey, nice to meet you. How's it going? And then we move on. I love that. It's it's George could have so easily have played it up to be like, hey audience, look, it's Obi-Wan and Anakin meeting, but I like the introduction of R2-D2 and even just the introduction of Obi-Wan, who was the first. And then if you'd seen the original trilogy, and this first character you see that you'd recognize in this movie is Obi-Wan. That when he first takes his hood off, and Qui-Gon says, "Don't center on your anxieties, Obi-Wan." Even that is just not treated as a huge like unveiling of a character, because he's playing it in his mind of, okay, this is the beginning, so we don't know these things yet. So it's I just love how downplayed that moment is. It seems unimportant. Like when I was a kid, I didn't really register how important that was, even though I knew, even though again, because I grew up with Star Wars in this kind of just weird jumble, so I didn't have like an order. I watched them and I just kind of watched them all at the same time in different ways. So I don't really have a chronology of that, but the weight, the gravity of this scene, the weight of it didn't really hit me until much later, when I realized, oh, this is actually a big deal. It's the first meeting of these two like key characters. There's such a great, brotherly family relationship that's going to happen between these two characters. It's so important, especially for the next two films. It's just it all starts here, and so cool.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that George took a moment to do that. He could have easily just ignored this and just moved on. Like, yeah, sure, they'll just meet eventually. But I like how he just takes a moment. It's not obvious, but it's just a little nod to like, we know what's going to come. There's going to be a lot of history between these two. Just that little line. Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then just move on. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a really well done balance.
And I like how Obi-Wan is kind of immediately charmed a little bit by Anakin, where Anakin says, "You're a Jedi too, pleased to meet you," and Obi-Wan kind of goes, "All right, this kid's okay." He's kind of hey. He's I'm not. He doesn't go, "What's this?" like he did with Jar Jar. He's more, he's like, "Okay, this kid's kind of cool. This kid's kind of cute. He's got he's amusing." Of course, he has his doubts about him still later on, but it's just a nice little reaction to that Obi-Wan gets, and Qui-Gon, of course, gives a little laugh at it. It's like. Funny seeing my Padawan act this way.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that light moment, but I also appreciate the little bit of character we get on Anakin in the scene. How the very first thing he says, well, like, what was that? And then, what are we gonna do about it? There's that Skywalker, like, we got to do something. We can't just sit here. What do you mean we should be patient? What are we gonna do? Yeah, that's just a good character moment for Anakin.
True.
And Luke, and Leia, and Padme. It's just very Skywalker.
Skywalkers are not patient. Yeah.
What are we going to do about it? Yeah, I just like that. And it's interesting also just kind of how quickly Qui-Gon moves past it. And that's just a very Jedi thing. It's like, wow. I mean, for us as Star Wars nerds, it's like, we just saw the first Sith in 1,000 years. We just saw the first battle of the Star Wars saga, And Qui-Gon's like, I guess it was after Queen. Well, meet Anakin and Obi-Wan. Like, this is a very Jedi thing to do. It's like, well, we're just going to be in the moment and move on. And trust the Force.
Yeah, it's true. That's a good point. It's a great point. Qui-Gon it could have been like, whoa, did you guys just see that? And we're just like, oh, by the way, this is my Padawan, Obi-Wan. Nice to meet you, Anakin. That's the most important thing to him at that moment. It's like, that's a great point. And you catch that. Yeah. How present he always is. Yeah, it's a great example of that.
Yeah, because you think about even the way he reacts to Anakin, like meeting Anakin. I mean, he's so contemplative and like, what's going on? I think this is the chosen one, and it's just you feel the weight of that. But here with Darth Maul, he's just like, okay, we're just gonna go and figure out what to do later. Yeah, it's such because for us it's just such a big deal. Like, whoa. Yeah. But, no, not for Qui-Gon. Always in the moment. So
totally. Yeah.
And then we take off. Oh, I was going to say we were off the Coruscant, but we're not quite there yet. We go back to Naboo. Getting off of Tatooine for a little while now.
Yeah, back to the plot. We've been having a lot of character stuff, but back to plot, moving things along. We got to establish how what the state of Naboo is, right? And and of course, people are dying, and Gunray is threatening the governor, and now and then we learn in this scene at the end, the battle droid is like now they're targeting the Gungans. So now it's not just the Naboo people that are in trouble. Now it's the Gungans. So again, George is so good at this because it's just such a difficult thing to do that every shot, every scene in Star Wars, you get new information. There's nothing is redundant. There's nothing is repeated. And this is such a tricky thing just in terms of editing, but as a writer, as writing a story, I can't imagine how difficult it is where each scene, it just, as you say, kind of hands the baton. It pushes things forward, and you're never, because we've seen this kind of scene before. We've already had a scene establishing, oh, Naboo's in trouble, but what's the new piece of information we're giving the audience? We always have to give them something new, because otherwise the scene is a waste. It's redundant. So in this case, it's now the governor is going to be, he's been captured, or he's I'm not sure, it's kind of unclear whether he was captured before or how long he's been in their custody, but Gunray threatens him with violence, with death. And then now the new big piece of information that the Gungans are targeted. Now they're going to start searching for these underwater villages, as the droids say. And so just the fact that this scene could very easily just feel like, okay, we're back on Naboo, can we just get back to our main characters? I don't care. It's like, no, that it's always ratcheting up the tension. It's always adding something new. Each scene is has to be doing that, otherwise it's a waste. And I think I remember Lucas and Filoni, or maybe it was Filoni, talking about how Lucas was talking to them about, I think it was landing at Point Rain, that episode of Clone Wars, where you talked about it a lot, where just the editing of that sequence was a big, once they accomplished that was a big deal for them, that they really kind of were learning from George, that they were able to like, as I think Lucas said, the guys did a good job because each shot has a purpose. Each shot is there for a reason, not just there to look cool. It's not there just to show you something you've already seen from a different angle. It's pushing everything forward, and that's just, and that gives scenes momentum. It adds interest for the audience. It keeps you engaged. It doesn't allow you to lose interest. It doesn't allow you to get complacent. And so it's just, George has always been so good at that. He started out as an editor, and he's just he's always loved editing. So he's good at that, but also just as a writer, he's able to build that into the structure of the movies as well. Sorry, I'm rambling about a really small thing, but it's just so impressive. Cool. As I've studied filmmaking, it's just so impressive to see people who actually do that, because it's so easily missed. So many movies don't do that, and it's not like they're bad. Doesn't make it mean it's a bad movie. It's just one of this, just an extra cherry on top. It just is. Yeah. These movies are deceptively well made because they're targeted for kids, and they can be a little silly at times, and people kind of look down at them as a result of that. But there's still so much. That doesn't mean there's not a ton of craftsmanship and hard work and just tons of artistry put into it.
Yeah, and it really holds your attention too. Because you can't miss a scene. It's like, oh, I can't take a bathroom break. Like, I gotta.
Exactly.
If I miss 5 minutes of this, I miss something.
Yep. Yeah. There you go.
And just good storytelling.
That's a good measure of that's a good point. It's a good measure of a story. Is like, can I, if I leave for 5 minutes and I'm still caught up, then the movie's not doing its job. Like, I need to be able to. It should be new information all the time. It should be building and building. Yeah. Yeah, which is so interesting. I've never thought about that until you kind of taught me some of this stuff. I was just thinking, like, wow, modern day storytelling doesn't do a whole lot of that. There's just, you can, very different style.
Yeah, it's a very different style. It's more artsy, maybe. Or like, we're going to show the same shot from a different angle. We're just going to stay on this scene because it's going to look cool. It's not really a contribution. It's just more of like, we're going to show off some art. Which isn't bad. Like, I'm not criticizing that, but it's just different. It's just so different. Yeah.
Yeah, Christopher Nolan has a style. It's kind of that way where he really likes to. Actually, sorry. What I meant to say was, his style is sort of like Lucas's philosophy, kind of taken to its extreme, I would say, which is that there's like no fat on a Christopher Nolan film, and there's just no breathing room. Like, everything is just pushing the plot forward, and everything is just moving constantly to a point where I kind of want to slow down a bit in his films. I kind of just want to take more of a breath. My point is that with Lucas, his films, he still manages to make you kind of feel like you're living in the world, and you're you're getting to see enough of everything without it feeling slow and being bogged down. Like it still has a good pace to it because everything's he's still adding new information each time, but it doesn't feel like it's just plot and there's no any extra, again, like cherries on top. It's not just like a cake with just one coat of frosting, you're good. Like he's still adding little fun little decorations, and there's still a fun little wrapping paper around the present that you get to unwrap before you actually get to the meat of it. He still makes it fun and gives it that immaculate reality that we've talked about before. And whereas I would say Nolan is kind of on the other extreme, where it's a very, very, he can make a 6-hour movie that most people would make a 6-hour movie. He could do it in 2 hours because he's just so efficient. He so condenses everything. And so that's one style that he's very famous for, but there's a lot of, as you say, a lot of styles out right now, a lot of films that are very leisurely paced, and they like to just kind of exist and show you, just exist in the scene for a while, exist in the world, and just kind of, show you something from like repeatedly from different perspective. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of times I like that, but for Star Wars, it works. That would almost probably be a little too, either extreme would probably be a little too much, but George really found a good balance where he's, it's fast paced, but also you get to see the world and really feel like you've experienced it. You don't really feel like you were cheated out of it at all.
Yeah, and I've struggled with that with modern storytelling trying to be pushed onto Star Wars, because they're trying to branch out in different directors, and George isn't a part of it anymore. It's distracting to me. It's not that it's bad per se. Again, I don't want to be criticizing.
Different. It just doesn't feel like Star Wars. Yeah,
it doesn't feel like Star Wars. Like there's that scene in Rogue One that really caught me off guard. It's like they call it the GoPro scene, where it's like almost like you have a GoPro attached to the X-wing.
Oh yeah. It's true.
It just feels really out of place for me. Or like we talked about with some of the modern TV shows, like they spend like 30 seconds to a minute and a half, like just zeroed in on a character, trying to build the tension between these characters where there's no dialogue or anything. I'm like, man, it just doesn't feel right. Like it's fine, but it just doesn't feel like Star Wars. Yeah, that makes sense to me. George never sat around and just did like, here, we're going to do an artsy shot here,
Well, and you can compare it to like Clone Wars, for example. Like, Lucas kind of brought that movie pace to television with Clone Wars. With television, it's much easier, much more advisable to have a slower pace and to spend more time on your sets, because you're, hopping from set to set and from scene to scene, doing all these different locations and all these different fight scenes. That's a lot to do when you have the budget's not so much a problem with TV shows anymore. It's time where the schedule is just unrelenting with television. It's just so quick, and you have to turn things around so quickly that with movies you get years, like 3 years to make it. And with TV shows, you got to put out the equivalent of like 4 movies worth every year. And so that's like, so you really have to. So to me, it kind of makes sense that in a lot of TV shows, and you see this in Star Wars now too, where they're spending a little more time in each set, and each set is even with the volume and everything they're using, it's a little slower pace. There's not as many action scenes. The action scenes aren't as long or as choreographed, and it's just you can see that they're really trying to get that movie quality, but it's just the medium is just very, very tricky to overcome when it's just you just don't have the time to have a really cool choreographed lightsaber battle and a cool location and have like Star Wars changes scenes so quickly in these movies. Like there's so many different scenes and setups, and people talk about there's so much CGI in these movies, they relied on it. I'm like, well, they couldn't have they couldn't have done all these different locations. They couldn't have built all this for real. There's no, like, it would have been impossible. Like, there's no movie that they'd be shooting for like 10 years. It would take so much time to try and build everything for real. And CG let them kind of made it feasible, made it possible. And in Clone Wars, you can see they were kind of able to keep up that pace. More so as they got into the later seasons. You can tell in the first couple seasons they had very few sets they could go to, very few characters they could work with. But by the time they finished, they were really able to kind of push Clone Wars into that sort of Star Wars movie world where they can just no holds barred. They can go to all these different locations, all these different characters. Everything's happening. They can have that pace, and they can have that richness of each frame. There's like a million things going on in each shot. Like that's so hard to get to, but it's easier to do that with CG and easier to do it with Clone Wars, I think. And it'd be interesting to see if they can ever get to that point with the live action shows in Star Wars, because it's just such a it's a lot of times it seems like you're probably going to be biting off more than you can chew with the Star Wars live action show, but we'll see. And to your point with Rogue One, sorry, I'm just ramble.
It's all good.
The point with Rogue One, it's like, it's a very different style, and it's it didn't really hit me how important the visual, the cinematography of Star Wars was to the experience of it until I saw, Force Awakens and Rogue One. I saw other people's bringing their style to it, and I realized, George actually did have a very specific style for Star Wars that, at least for me, contributed a lot to making it feel like Star Wars I remember. And but then I also maybe kind of go back and realize, if you look at Empire is, I said Revenge of the Sith was kind of the odd one out in terms of the story and the character, the emotional side of things. Empire Strikes Back is definitely the odd one out when it comes to the cinematography visually, because Irvin Kershner was the director, and he went in a very different direction than if you look at New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. It's very different visually. It's like watching, it's like as different as Force Awakens was from like Revenge of the Sith. That's sort of how Empire Strikes Back kind of felt like. Looking at New Hope, I'm used to it now because I've grown up with Empire, but looking at it, it's just like, oh wow, there's very different choices being made here, and not so much with like the space battle stuff, because George was still in charge of that, but just the character stuff, the humans, the real sets and everything, it was shot very, very differently. And that movie is also just kind of, Empire Strikes Back, and actually in many ways is more of an odd man out than Revenge of the Sith is. But anyway, I'm rambling, but
no, that's good stuff.
All that to say, all that to say, there's the visual part of Star Wars is very tricky. If you mess with it, it can make something feel less like Star Wars, but sometimes if you do it in the right way, it can push into a new direction, a new area, like George did with Clone Wars. Like, that's talk about a visual change, making an animated show. I didn't like it for the longest time. I was like, this doesn't look like Star Wars. But then realizing, once I got over it, it's like, actually, this is very much like Star Wars, and it's actually he's using a lot of the same techniques, and the new stuff he's added is working well. So.
Yeah, I remember just a testimony to what you're saying. Dave Filoni in an interview there's that episode of Clone Wars where Grievous comes to Naboo, where they try to like manipulate the new king of the Gungans kind of thing. And I remember Dave commenting on that, and he said, we have to do so much stuff in 20 minutes. Like, we have to basically do, this huge fight scene, and like Grievous comes and tries to take over Naboo and they're shutting down all the battle droids, and it's like this. He's like, the things we have to accomplish in 20 minutes is just so vast. But George was like, nope, just do it, and it's just a testimony to what you're saying. For him, that's just how he rolls. Like, every minute is gonna matter. We have 20 minutes to talk about a planet-wide invasion with Anakin and Grievous is over here, and Anakin's over here fighting Dooku, and they're in the underwater, Ordo Gunga and all this stuff, and we're gonna do it in 20 minutes. You don't find that. Yeah. Especially in television.
And you can tell when they started doing those like multi-part arcs in the Clone Wars. That's when Lucas was really like, okay, we can do a lot now. And like, well, okay, we only have 20 minutes, so let's stretch that out to a couple episodes.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So I miss that. I do. I miss that a lot in Star Wars. There's just, George has such a unique, it's a way of storytelling, and it's just, it's not there. And that's, in some ways it's understandable, because like, how can you? That was very unique to a specific guy. And then there's other beefs I have that we don't need to go into, but still, it's just I miss that. I miss that sparkle. There's that George sparkle that he really created, and I think that's part of the reason why Star Wars lasts the way it does today. How far are we at now? 40, 50 years from Star Wars. And it's like, man, it still holds up, and I think part of that comes to this. George just created such a unique way of doing things, and it still holds up. It still holds. Because movies, you look at other movies around that era, there's nothing like Star Wars. There's no other movie like it. And I'm thinking like original trilogy, like there's no, who does conventions in 2023 for a movie in the 70s? There's nothing like it.
Yeah.
People don't even do that about modern movies. And I just think that's such a testimony to the way like you said, the artistry and just the small things that really count. I mean, also the big things, like we talked about, like everybody can relate to that story of leaving home and choosing to let go. It's like, are you going to let go or are you going to be selfish? We all get that because that's at the core of who we are. So I just think George is just such a master of that, resonating with us, and holds our attention span, and just everything. George is just, this is why we're here. We love it. We love talking about this stuff. It's just fun, and it resonates with us, So I love it.
Yeah, and it's true, and I think that at this point we can get, George's, what he brought to these movies was just this very specific kind of the recipe that makes George, like whatever all the different influences that he has. It's like, you might get like 3 or 4 of those things in like Rebels, and then you may get a couple other things when you see Book of Boba Fett or whatever. There's everyone kind of brings something out, like each fan who encounters Star Wars, we see something that we love about it and go, what really feels like Star Wars to me is this aspect, this, I don't know, this, when it comes to the design of a ship or something, or this type of line of dialogue or whatever it is. And so everyone kind of brings a different combination of those little Georgisms to the plate. Yeah. So it's interesting because each version of Star Wars that's been put out by people who grew up with it, now like you can see that what they like about what their favorite parts of Star Wars are, because like JJ brings us certain parts of Star Wars that he likes to it, and then Rian Johnson does it, and then Dave, of course, Dave and Jon Favreau and everyone brings their own thing to it. So it's interesting. We just keep getting tiny different. We're never gonna get 100% of the Georgisms in Star Wars again, probably, but we keep getting little different combinations of it. So which probably makes it a little bit more apparent when some of them are lacking. We look at it and go, ooh, they really nailed this part, but because they did this so well, that makes this look a little bit weird because it's in contrast to that. So it is interesting. Yeah. Now, especially as I've been looking through these and studying these movies more, going back and looking at the new stuff, going, oh, I see that they're trying to. Everyone's kind of has a different, different things they like about Star Wars. They're trying to bring to the table, and it goes back all the way back to Empire when George said to Kershner, he said, it's your movie, do what you want. I'm not gonna, backseat drive. I'm not gonna be in the passenger seat telling you how to drive. And it does feel a little bit different, but again, Kershner had a lot of cool ideas to Empire that of course Lucas signed off on. Of course, he wanted, he talked to Dave Filoni. He said, want more. What do you say? You want more anime influence in Clone Wars, which is very different from what Star Wars was up to that point. And and stuff with Genndy Tartakovsky's Clone Wars series, like he let them kind of have control and freedom over that, and for a long time he was taking what they made and then working that into the new Clone Wars show, and so he wasn't really too strict about artistic styles, interpretations, but as long as there were certain core pieces, again those Georgisms, as long as those were there, and so everyone, it's interesting. We just keep getting these different combinations of them, so hopefully one day we'll get like 80% or we'll get super close. But it'll be interesting to see how it progresses, because it's a very tricky thing. But anyway, I've totally lost the plot. I don't know where we are in the story now.
That's okay. I should probably head out, but
okay, yeah,
something I was going to say, just kind of as we wrap up, if we had done this podcast 12 years ago, it'd been vastly different, I think.
Oh yeah.
And it's sort of given me an appreciation for some of what Disney's doing. This maybe sound bad. They're showing us how not George they are, and how this gives me that much more appreciation for George.
You need to contrast. Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking, like, if we had done this with no knowledge of Disney Star Wars, it just would have been so different. Like, we would definitely have his still Star Wars, but it's just so different now that we're seeing Star Wars away from George. It's like, wow. I'm just appreciating his stuff so much more. And just the difficulty, like what you said, just the difficulty of trying to copy that in a sense. And I'm not sure they're trying to copy it, but trying to, just seeing other guys take it and run with it without George at the helm, because you look back at, Kershner or Dave Filoni when it was under George, he still had the control in the sense of like he was still overseeing it and still putting his flavor on it. But now that he's not there, so different. Even when we have some of the same guys like Filoni,
Yeah.
I've been surprised how different Filoni's Star Wars is from George's even. I'm like, wow. Okay, because I know George really wanted to do that. He wanted to introduce new guys and train up new guys, and that's part of what Clone Wars was. Is let's try a different flavor, let's try a different person. But George was still there watching it. Now that he's there and not there, it's like, wow, it's so different.
Yeah, he had this eye of being able to bring new things to Star Wars, but they would still fit in. Like they would be quickly become added to whatever the definition of Star Wars was. That definition kept getting wider every time he would add a new influence or bring in a new storyteller. But he was good at seeing the new ideas that would contribute and make Star Wars better. And so it's like we realize it's very hard to know what that is. To know okay when, because you don't want to just repeat. You don't just want to make you don't want to remake the movies. You want to just redo the stories. You want to add new stuff, but how much new is too much, and what kind of new is the right new? Like, is it going to be? Is it going to contribute? Is it going to detract? It's just that's right. a tricky thing, and it's a lot of times it's just can be, And as a fan, when you take these things like so seriously, again, Anakin, you got to let it go. It's like it's not.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. You got to be like, well, it's good try, good effort, but we'll hopefully better in the next one. Whatever it is, whether it's a comic book you read you didn't like, or a video game you're like that didn't feel like Star Wars or whatever it was. So yeah, it's true. Like just having Star Wars that wasn't made by George was like kind of first opportunity to go like, oh, this is what it absolutely helped me realize what Star Wars actually was, what George did, because you didn't have anything to compare it to. You didn't have Star Wars made by, I guess like Genndy Tartakovsky was kind of like the first like kind of Star Wars that was sort of wasn't like the Ewoks show. It was like a kind of a serious version of Star Wars that was kind of made without a lot of Lucas influence. There's some, but there's also, but it did have a very different feel to it. But a lot of things were consistent too, and so it helps you. It gives you something to compare it to, and it makes you understand each one more. It's like, oh, this is what Star Wars could be. So okay, clearly it's not this. George clearly wasn't doing this because he was out. Oh, and now I can see why he was doing that. It's a good point you bring up that you can actually understand it better. That 12 years ago. Is that when he sold it? Was that 12 years ago?
2012, I thought, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that's when he sold it.
Yeah, you're right. Good point.
10 or 12, somewhere in there. Yeah. I know, isn't that crazy? It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I remember thinking like when Force Awakens came out, I was like, wow, Revenge of the Sith was 10 years ago. But Force Awakens is almost 10 years ago, which is crazy. That's like 2 years. Yeah, like, wow, time moves fast. Like, it's so weird. Like, Force Awakens, that's old hat now. It's like, I remember that was like the newest thing ever. Anyway,
I know,
it's always like whenever I get used to the title, because I remember every time a new Star Wars like title would come out, I'd be like Revenge of the Sith, that's a weird name. Like Attack of the Clones.
Yeah.
And then like Force Awakens, wow, that's a weird. And then now it's just like, oh yeah, TFA.
Yeah.
We're used to it now. Last Jedi. Yeah. It's just weird how like, oh yeah, it's something I'm used to now. Just as it happens. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's a fun little. Nice. That's a nice thought to end on. It's just like how again we talk about all the time, but how unique Star Wars is, how many different things George brought to it, and how it's we can celebrate it because it's something it is rare, and it actually makes it really cool because we're not going to see something like that again. Even though it's kind of sad as a Star Wars fan, like I want more. Yeah. It teaches you to be content with what you have because it was so special. You realize with the contrast, like you're talking about with the new stuff, you can see how special that original Star Wars that George brought us really was. And and that's why we get to, and that's what's made me want to talk with you about it all the time. Have these conversations is great. It's a great, it actually is worth celebrating. It's a wonderful story that he's given our culture. So
he's affected a lot of lives. And it's cool to unpack this and see kind of why.
Totally.
Yeah. So, well, thank you, sir. I guess I better run. Taking my son to go see the new Paw Patrol movie, so it's going to be
nice.
a
cinematic
movie
experience,
experience.
I'm sure. Yeah. All right, that's it for this episode. Join us in the next one as we continue our series on the Phantom Menace. As always, thanks for listening, and on to the next one.